Welcome to the Homegrown podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good morning.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's episode we're titling Real Food 101. We want this to be like a start here version of the podcast. And then we have a really cool, exciting framework to sort of introduce you to as we're using this discussion to really be a launching pad, hopefully for your real food journey, something we've been talking about a lot on the podcast recently. And I want to just do a refresher of what in the world do we mean when we say real food? And two, pitch the idea that you don't need another diet to follow. You don't need another trend to follow. You don't need another biohacker to listen to their 5 steps of what they do. Because, I think we should be taking a more adaptable approach to real food and a nourished lifestyle.
So good. Education is going to be more powerful in customizing nutrition for you than in taking on some one-size-fits-all restrictive and or inclusive diet, right? And everybody's different. Everybody needs to have nourishment differently. So having that education is going to be far more powerful than just the diets themselves. Although the diets themselves can be helpful in understanding ways we can treat our bodies. So we're not going to forget them. We're just not necessarily going to recommend them.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, before we even get there, all the different things that influence the food decisions you're making for your family. Number one is probably budgeting. That's probably top of mind for most people. Wow, how much money do I have in my grocery budget? What can I actually afford to buy? And then from there, you have to say, okay, well, I have X amount of money allocated every month. Where do I spend my dollars? How do I maximize my grocery budget for the most nutrition possible and not waste money on things that are really expensive, but maybe don't deliver the same nutritional punch as they should? But then there's also the questions of like ethical and moral decisions, and how are we shaping the food industry, and how are we voting with our dollar? You hear that term a lot, and that's valid too. So I understand when we walk into a grocery store and we carry this big load of anxiety. I too have had the heart pounding, my palms are sweating. I don't know if I can afford this at the checkout moments for months on end. I used to dread grocery shopping because I just hated that feeling of, am I making the right decision? What's more important right now? Am I sacrificing my family's well-being by spending this money on food when we don't really have all of the flexibility in our budget right now? I don't know if you've ever felt that when you've gone grocery shopping, but I definitely have walked in with all of these thoughts swirling in my head. You know that reel, you brought this up the other day, you know that real common reel sound of all of the noises, the people talking in the restaurant, and then you do something peaceful and it just all goes away and it's quiet. I want this episode to give you the quiet, give you the peace of mind walking into the grocery store, the farmer's market, your backyard garden, your local rancher, wherever. I want you to have confidence in making food decisions for your family. So that's my goal.
I love it.
Cool.
Take me there.
So I am going to walk us there through the lens of our newest resource. We're dropping a book called The Real Food Framework because that's what we see the vision and the future of this real food movement being, is giving people a framework to adapt their dietary choices to whatever works for their family. This isn't like everyone needs to go paleo. Everyone needs to eat butter, 3 times a day. Everyone needs to, there's no prescription here. This is a very descriptive resource. And it's a framework where you can take principles and apply them to your family. And then from there, make the best choices that you want. And what is unfortunate about that is that it's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's not a, here's the foods you can eat and here's the brands you should buy necessarily. Now, there are some brand recommendations just from things that we've used for years. This isn't a brand guide. There's plenty of creators who create those brand guides and they're helpful. So if you want that, go to those people. But this is more of a framework so that you can sit down and decide for yourself, like what actually makes sense for us in our location, in our current family phase, in our diet, in our, moral and ethical dietary ideologies. And
it's like a real food course for you to learn how to be empowered to make decisions that are best for you. Not only in just that, here's, do's and don'ts, but also like where that comes from, the history of these foods, where they've come from, the guiding principles that we utilize in different situations and scenarios. This is not just how to shop at a farmer's market that's all organic and grass-fed and regenerative. This is not that.
Yeah.
This is you found yourself in a situation where you're like in a little bit of a food desert. What do you do? Because, this is 2024. This is not the 40s, right? Where we can stroll around life making the best decisions for ourselves by just trusting the food that's around us all the time. We kind of have to take matters into our own hands and do the best we can on a regular basis rather than living or striving to be in this like perfect place.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more longevity in that, less than, if you have the resources and the time and the context, right? You live in a place where this is the climate, maybe where you can do this, where you can be eating fresh, homegrown vegetables, pasture raised, meat from a local farmer every day, all the time, forever.
Amazing.
Good. That would be great. That is very ideal. We were talking to Jack Wolfson about moving to Costa Rica, right?
Yeah.
This is good. If you want to be living that perfect lifestyle, what did he say? Move. You have to move.
Yeah.
So let's say you can't move, or you're not moving, or you don't want to move. This is a book to empower you to go through life feeling confident and understanding and truly knowing that you're able to do what's best.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. I want to, the way that the book starts and the way that I think this conversation around food should always start is recognizing that we live in the like post-industrial food system world. Okay, the industry that is the food system, meaning all of these middlemen who are then taking food and buying it from the producer and maybe transforming it in a certain way and packaging it and marketing it and then selling it to you, is completely different than where we would have been 200 years ago. So when we talked to Mr. Will Harris about even how his farm has transformed and how his father used to just sell direct to consumer before he transitioned, maybe it was his grandfather, before they transitioned their farm to more of a conventional calf cow operation. That is like what I would call pre-industrialization for the most part. You have a local rancher who is slaughtering meat, who doesn't have access to refrigeration, so they're selling within like a 10, 15-mile radius, maybe smaller than that. And that food chain is so much shorter, so much more concise. There's so much less to consider there because it's just your local food with no agenda, no political leaning, no marketing, no endorsements, right? That's a simpler time. Now, I don't want to romanticize that because there's obviously amazing strides that come with wider food distribution, which is what industrialization has done for us. Now we have a distribution of food where everyone in the United States pretty much has access to some food. Now, is it the most nourishing food? No. But we want to talk about real food in the context of history. And so that's the first point of the real food framework, is taking a historical lens to your food. And this, again, means that the responsibility is kind of on the consumer to decide what you really want to explore. I give the example of dairy in the book, and I give you a really quick snapshot of the transition of how dairy became to be this pasteurized, homogenized, corn-fed sort of slurry, right? That's different from the whole raw milk directly from the farm from cows on pasture. And I give you that as an example of saying, hey, this is one story being told that can illuminate how our food has changed over history. And if we are just if we forget that, if we forget that the foods that our parents ate is different from the foods that we ate because of constant innovation, constant engineering, constant agricultural improvement, as some would say, then we're going to just fool ourselves into thinking like, well, they ate it, so we're good to go, But the foods that we're eating now is not the same nutritionally as the foods that our parents grew up on. And also the food system that our kids will face and grow up in and have to navigate as adults is not the same system that we are, because things are changing so rapidly with technology. So the first piece of this really is like, number one, what culinary wisdom can be extracted from authentic cuisine? Like, this is where Nourishing Traditions is a wonderful resource. Diving into Sally Fallon's book and even beyond that, Dr. Weston A. Price's book, Physical Degeneration, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, painting the picture of, hey, how did people pre-industrialization eat? And then what happened when they started incorporating some of the more industrialized foods? And so what this does is it kind of takes away some of the noise and the clutter around, okay, but what's like the healthiest? Like, what is the American Heart Association saying about seed oils right now? Because they're telling me that I should eat that. Like, just forget about all politics and agenda. Just look at the history. And then from there, you make your decisions. And so I just think this is a really powerful tool. And so the whole section of the book is looking at food through a historical lens. What traditions have been passed down by generations? How can we incorporate these age-old food practices into our nourishment? What does it look like to have a traditional kitchen? I give you those lenses. And so as quick examples, it's like, okay, if I'm going to apply this logic and say I have been considering gluten, and I'm like, you know what, everything that I feel about modern wheat, it's just gluten isn't it. Like, gluten, it makes me feel bad. I eat stuff from the grocery store. I buy a bagel. I don't feel good. I feel sluggish. I need to cut out gluten. Everyone's cutting out gluten. Let's just cut it out. Okay, let's take a historical lens to that food. Let's look at how wheat has transformed. Let's look at how we have changed from a chromosomal level through hybridization, not genetic modification, but hybridization. And let's look at like modern wheat versus heritage wheat versus ancient grain varieties. And there's a history there and a story to be told. Okay, so that's one aspect. Then let's take that a next layer. Well, how was wheat consumed? Was it just these quick breads where we had instant yeast and they fermented for maybe 4 hours and then we ate them and it was hyper refined grain with basically just the endosperm in there, which is really, really starchy, no fiber in there, no minerals, nothing? No, that's the modern story of wheat. But if we look at the historical approach, it would have been leavened over time using a sourdough starter culture. It could have been soaked. It could have been nixtamalized, as with corn. That's not gluten, obviously, but that's a grain example of how processing a grain over time made it more digestible, made it more nutrient dense, made it more bioavailable. And those are the lost traditions that we have completely forgotten, leading us to now what we see as this white bread at the store. Oh, that makes my stomach hurt. Now I don't eat gluten. So taking you on that roadmap of a historical lens to real food. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. Any questions on that?
No.
Cool. Well, that is, if I could like stand up and give a TED talk, it would be like, if you can take that lens with a lot of your lifestyle, I feel like we would have a much more balanced approach to life. Because I think what happens is when we lose sight of history, we completely disassociate ourselves with how our biological needs would have been met naturally. I think our episode with Craig McCloskey of ancestral supplements and just like ancestral living 101 was a great example of like, hey, there's these 9 tenets that are so simple that if we just connect back to how we would have lived previously, we can achieve optimal health.
Totally.
So I think that that's really cool. The next portion of that. So aside from, and so you can apply this right now. You don't have to go buy the book. You can begin to look into the history of real food. You can read books on this. There's podcasts you can listen to. You can search videos on YouTube. Like, there's so much information out there. Just choose the food and pick one. I personally love milk because it's such an interesting story for me. And it's such a staple in American culture that really has transformed. And I think the more the FDA and the CDC like dog on raw milk, the more interested I am in it because it's fascinating to me. But you can take whatever food you want to explore first and then continue to just snowball that. Just continue to snowball your education around that. The next portion of this framework and the next place that I would encourage folks to move into once you've opened up the door to the history of foods is really looking at, okay, let's be honest about our modern society and how we live in an increasingly toxic world. I've said that before and gotten scoffs, and it's fine. I stand by what I say. Our world is increasingly toxic. Okay, we have increasing EMF radiation. We have increasing chemical exposure. We have increasing degradation of our food and water supply. We have like decreasing mineral and nutrients coming into our food. So let's talk about how we can mitigate our toxic exposure. Not be scared of it, not fear every little thing and walk with anxiety, but how can we mitigate these things and what are like the top offenders? So for here, I the things that in the food system come top of mind for me are, let's talk about genetically modified foods. This is new. This is something our generation is facing for the first time. Again, let's look at the history. Let's look at how they're starting. Let's look at what they actually are. And let's look at the implications of growing food that has been genetically modified and what that means for the application of things like glyphosate and other herbicides that are perfectly paired with these GMO seeds. So we talk about that. We talk about PFAS. This is a really confusing topic. We did a full episode on PFAS, but they can sneak in your food and water supply in places you wouldn't even know because they're applied to agricultural land. So they can be applied to land 2-3 years before that land was ever cultivated and still lead to high PFAS content in the food produced in that land. Entire family farms are having to shut down and stop their meat production and sales because their land has tested so high in PFAS as a result of this biosolid sewage sludge fertilizer that the EPA has allowed us to apply to our land, and it's destroying entire communities. So this is a real thing, and I want to talk about it. And these are things that you can say, now that I have the knowledge and information on this, I can make a decision. I can decide, is organic worth it in this aspect? Because yeah, organic food can't be grown on a plot of land that's been sprayed with biosolids. You see what I'm saying?
I do.
So mitigating toxic exposure is incredibly important for our health, for our fertility, and for the health of our children. And so, but this is one where it's easy to just kind of pick and choose labels and pick and choose things to kind of like fear the top offenders. But I think if you the deeper you move into this space, the more you can make a balanced decision. You don't have to be so fearful. Like we don't have an air filtration system in our home right now, so I open my windows as much as possible. I don't have a whole house water filter right now, but I do use a water filter for our drinking and some of our cooking water. You see what I'm saying? So giving you pieces of what it means to mitigate your toxic exposure, I think is really important, and something that isn't talked about necessarily always in the same conversation as food. But there's so many things. This isn't like your cleaners in your house. We're talking about in your food and water supply mostly. And then the last two sections of this framework are ones that I'm super excited about because we talk about leveraging your ingredients, and we've had this conversation before on the show. about, it's one thing, like two chefs can buy the same ingredient and then produce a completely different food from a nutrition quality, right? One person can buy a head of cabbage and do a quick slaw, like a quick pickled slaw, serve it on a taco. One person can take that cabbage and ferment it and make sauerkraut and have a boost of vitamin C and microbes that are feeding their gut. Do you see what I'm saying? So we can leverage our ingredients in different ways. We can take the boneless, skinless chicken breast and grill that up and throw that on a salad. Or we can buy the whole chicken and then use the carcass and the bones and the skin and the connective tissues and make a beautiful stock.
This is like the section of almost like kitchen hacks
Yes.
that are maybe you can call it like the lost kitchen hacks, if you will.
I call them the lost kitchen arts.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, I think that's funny that you said that. But yeah, that's in this section, right? Of some of these ways that we can really utilize, I say leverage our ingredients, because we are in a time where buying food is really expensive. So I want to get the most I can out of that.
And when we say get the most out of it, there's two ways to look at that. And I feel like this is a newer concept in the world. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's an old one that we're bringing back. But it doesn't mean that we're just eating nose to tail. We don't waste anything. We're, chopping up the stems of the broccoli and steaming those up too.
Which we do.
It's not that we're just eating the leaves of the celery, because we're getting the most out of what we buy, but we're also maximizing the nutritional value of those ingredients. So if we're going to eat chicken, we're also going to boil that chicken carcass to extract, not just because chicken broth is more, right? It's not just for more. It's also for maximizing nutritional value so that we're putting those nutrients into our body. It's almost like if we're going to buy all this good food, then we're going to get all the, kind of bonus supplements that you can earn by working a little harder on utilizing those ingredients as well. So I think there's two things going on there.
Yeah. And again, you don't have to buy the book to grasp these concepts, but the best ways we've done this is by, buying the whole chicken and then turning that into a broth, utilizing every bit of the vegetable, or taking that vegetable and fermenting it and turning it into this probiotic, beautiful, like amazing addition. And then what that also does for you is, when we start to learn about these other elements of health, like blood sugar regulation and fiber and digestion, it gives us the vehicle for which we can add enzyme-rich foods and probiotic foods so that we can eat those things first before we have our carbohydrates at our meal. And that can literally slow down the rush of glucose into your blood system. So now we're talking about, it's not just you look cute because you chopped a cabbage and you made some sauerkraut so you feel like homemakery. You're literally changing the way that your body is digesting the rest of your food, because you have incorporated a fresher fermented food into your meals, and you've understood how to eat that meal in the correct order. And so now you're changing the way your body is absorbing these nutrients, and you're lessening your blood glucose spike by just simply adding in the proper meal composition. So like that's the power of this stuff. That's why this framework is, I think, probably the most important book we've put out, especially for adults. I think our children's resources have their own like special place in my heart, but our meal plans are wonderful. They give you like the what to do, but this really gives you how to think about these things and then wrap it all into one thing.
Yeah.
So the leveraging your ingredients, we talk about that. We talk about, okay, let's talk about blood glucose for just a second and why this is important and how you can actually start implementing these things on an everyday basis. And then the very final portion of the framework is optimizing your family kitchen, which again ties all the information into practical ways that you can shop, because grocery shopping is really the beginning. It's the starting line of your food strategy. If you're going to feed yourself nutritious food or feed your family nutritious food, you have to understand how to grocery shop. And I love that we talked about this on another podcast, but that might mean you have to identify which stores you're going to. You might have to start shopping at 2 or 3 stores just to get your basics for the weekly need. And that's annoying, I'll admit it. But what it does is it opens up, one, you can learn how to save money because things are cheaper at some stores than they are at the other. And you're spending your time versus your money by shopping at maybe those other locations. But then you also get to know, like, okay, well, what brands do I really believe in and want to support, and where can I find those? Because I know I can't find everything I need from one spot. I know that I have to go to at least 2 different grocery stores. We also order from a local farm through a herd share. And then we have, other things that we can do getting things delivered, like through Thrive Market. Or when we buy flour and it comes directly from a flour mill that's getting delivered to my door. So I know that I'm buying food from multiple places. So yeah, I think that when we are able to identify the best sourcing, which there's a sourcing guide, which I think is really, really powerful.
In this framework as well.
In the framework, yeah. So in this last section, talking about optimizing your family kitchen. And we're going to look at it through a lens of good, better, best. So here's a good option for you. If you're like, I don't know what eggs to buy. I don't know what chicken to buy. I don't know what beef to buy. I don't know where to get my vegetables. What about my dairy? Like, what about my nuts and seeds and my grains? Here's a good, better, best option. So you can tailor it to your budget. You can understand what these food labels mean. You can figure out, okay, well, I'm going to buy the good version here, and then I'm going to spring for the best version on this one. So an example of how we do that in our household is, man, we spring for the best dairy possible. We spend a lot of our hard-earned cash on our raw dairy and our high-protein skier yogurt that we're obsessed with, that you guys know. Painerland Sisters, shout out. So like, we spring for the best there because it's such a staple in our food, and such a staple. And like, even this morning, to be able to open up and have like 16 grams of protein without any cooking effort while I'm literally frying bacon in the pan. Oh my gosh, so great.
Yeah.
Now, the things that I might buy a good version in, sometimes I go for a slightly cheaper egg. Sometimes I don't buy the most expensive butter possible. Sometimes I'm getting an organic grain of some sort, like an organic pasta, but it's not going to be anything special. It's not going to be like the very best sourdough pasta I could buy, but it's good. It's a good option. And so it would be silly to recommend just only the best, right? Only the top shelf foods, because I don't know anyone who shops like that personally. But yeah, the sourcing guide in here and the all the other little elements are just this accumulation of, one, what we've done in our family. I want this resource to feel like, hey, we're sitting down for coffee and you're just asking me questions of like, well, how do you make this work? And what do you do for here? And how do you measure this? And it's in my voice. I'm writing it in first person. Like, it's like I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And it's a compilation of everything that we've learned on this show, interviewing other guests and experts. And I think after 2 years of podcasting and almost 8 years of pursuing this real food journey in our life, and doing it through various seasons of, financial seasons, and growing our family and growing businesses, we've really been able to tailor this thing and flex when we need to. So the real food framework is something that I think should be your starting line for your real food journey. And then the way that you can kind of ignite some fresh energy into this, if you're already on your real food journey, is that, if you guys remember, we did a real food reset in the beginning of this year, and the back of the book gives you the outline to do that in your own kitchen. So for 30 days, let's do a real food kitchen refresh, and let's focus on one thing per week and really hone those skills for 7 days, and then move on and then do your next thing. So I'm excited about that portion too.
Super cool. I know that we've been talking about it for a while, and it's been something that it's been evolving and growing and it's just for a long time. And I do think that there's some real power here because it's really less of a follow these rules sort of situation and more of a we want to give you all of the answers, all the power, all the education, all of the information so that anyone can go through life and be confident in their ability to be a parent, their ability to be a person that's nourishing themselves, to be confident in their decisions and their purchases, where they spend their money, and just alleviate as much of that real food dieting anxiety. Am I treating myself right? What's going on? When something starts happening, you don't know what's the deal. You can start to look into the kind of nourishment, right? Like we get to a place where, man, my kids are just experiencing X or Y or Z, and it's like, man, you can start to really have some answers and some control that will be very comforting as a homemaker, as a parent, as a mother, as a father, as a couple, as a single person, whoever you are. This will help you walk through life with confidence in your food and nourishment purchasing and kind of, I don't know, consuming behaviors. And that's really the purpose of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. That's super cool. Anything else with this?
Nothing more on the book. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of like, what were some of your like real food aha moments as a guy? Like incorporating that through your lens of peak performance and really wanting to be healthy.
You know, it's there comes a point where I think for sure being a dad changes a lot about how you view responsibility in different realms of life.
Yeah.
You know, understanding how important it is financially to be a part of the kind of provision that our family experiences is a big deal. The responsibility in health and wellness becomes something for a guy that hits home when you have kids, for sure. A lot more than when you're just
feeding
single,
yourself.
figuring it out, right?
Yeah.
It's just like a commodity. It's just like, get it done. Let's move on. You know, I just want to eat. Let's go. Why do I have to, I don't want to waste time on this. And so, you know, when I became a dad, this protector mindset comes into play. And I think for sure when we started experiencing challenges with our kids and when doctors couldn't explain them or give us an answer, because that's the easy thing to do, is you go to a doctor, pediatrician, specialist, or whoever, and you say, hey, what's going on here? These are some challenges we're experiencing. And we were met with on a regular basis with our baby, well, hey, sometimes it just happens. And you just have a colicky baby. Oh my gosh, how many times was I told that? I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, this is a doctor, someone that is held in this like high regard, this high esteem. They know everything, right? They are the authority. They're telling me that I just have a colicky baby. This is their medical opinion. Like, there's so many ways to kind of phrase that, and it's just like, what? Okay, well, like, I kind of knew that. I kind of knew that we're in this situation, but why? Like, I want the answers. Why is this baby colicky and that one's not? And to say that sometimes they are did not feel right to me. It still doesn't. And I'm no like anti-doctor kind of vibes here. Just when that started happening, meaning that doctors have a lot of things that they are very good at, but telling us how to nourish a baby, like what foods they require and how that may impact their behavior and how they feel and how they grow up and like what foods they may enjoy in the future. That's not what they're studying. Okay. Doctors are not taking hours and days and months and classes doing tons of research to figure out how to nourish your child. They're just not. There's so much other things that they have to learn and think about and figure out. How do I know this? Well, Joe, you don't know anything. No, we've talked to doctors.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked to many of doctors on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we do. You can go find those episodes.
Mm-hmm.
There are episodes that we've talked to literal pediatricians on this. Go back, find it. So I'm not speaking out of just my behind, right? This is 100% regurgitating information that has been given to us from doctors, from pediatricians, from surgeons, from specialists, from cardiologists. This is what they're telling us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Like, this is not to induce fear and anxiety in people. This is hey, guess what? There are some really valuable resources in the medical industry that you can utilize for yourself. But then there's some things you're going to have to find your own way, believe it or not. Believe it or not, you can't go to the doctor for absolutely everything. We were just watching an episode of Friends last night. It's so funny, so timely. And Rachel, if you're a fan of the show, one of the characters has a baby, and she's calling her doctor 5 to 10 times a day for everything. She's a new mom. That's kind of the bit. That's kind of the comic portion of this episode. And the doctor fires her, right? They fires for calling too much. And the funny lines are like, what were you calling about? Well, turns out she had hiccups.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is that, yeah, the joke there is you cannot call your doctor for everything. And you're going to have to figure some things out on your own. But like, in reality, there's some truth to that, in the sense that you will inevitably call your doctor and they won't know. They might not be willing to say they don't know, because that's bad for business, right? Well, my doctor says they don't know. Right? I don't know any doctors ever say that. Like, I don't know what to do about that. Next question, right? I don't know. I've never, it's just not really common. It's funny because people ask me stuff all the time, and things that I'm an expert in, right? In my business. And I will regularly say, hey, you know what? I don't know. But let's talk about it. Let's see if we can collaborate and come up with the best decision possible.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll look into that. I'll research that. I'll see what I can learn. But at the end of the day, there are things that doctors don't know. Believe it or not, gasp. Medical school is not everything. All-knowing, omniscient people. That's not what's happening. And that's okay, is what I'm trying to say here. It's okay. Utilize them for what they're capable of doing, and there's a lot of good that doctors do. I'm so thankful for doctors. But man, when we were raising our babies, and that was a really long way of saying, when we were raising our babies and we were left without some answers, when in a roundabout way, a doctor said to us, I don't know, then we had to go figure it out. And you know what? At the time, there weren't a ton of resources. We weren't listening to the Homegrown podcast, right? We didn't have a ton of things that were telling us about how we can adjust or change our life. We didn't have a real food framework.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that.
I'm actually so thankful we didn't have social media to influence our entry point into real food. I think now, even 8-9 years later, how cluttered of a space it is.
Oh my gosh.
And how confusing that is for folks. And I've watched people be sort of like tossed in the waves of this next, I haven't been able to solve these symptoms, and now this next thing is coming up and it's saying that's going to solve everything for me. I just needed to focus on this element of my body, or I needed to focus on this missing nutrient, or I needed to focus on this thing. And I think that's the point I really want to hone in on with this framework and with this episode, and with this encouragement of like, that's not the answer. Yeah. That is our training that our society has been working so hard to perfect, because we live in a consumer culture. Mm-hmm. We are consuming media all the time. And specifically with the virality of like the health and wellness space and the crunchy space, it can serve as a great tool to find things that resonate with you. But oh my gosh, there's so much garbage out there.
Well, here's the deal, right? People are trying to make it.
Yeah.
We're trying to make it. Everyone's trying to make it. So there's going to be trends that people lean into, and yeah, they want to do some good, but they also are trying to ride the wave.
Yeah.
Right. Trends we watched. This is something that we're trying to avoid like the plague. Right. This is why we're not posting and promoting sourdough like it's a life or death situation. Could we get probably more views and more I don't know, reactions, more traffic, more followers if we promoted sourdough every single day about, yeah, maybe. It's trendy. People are super obsessed with sourdough right now. And we're pro sourdough. But I don't think that it's a starting place for a good, healthy diet.
Yeah, I actually think it can be a huge illusion. You can think that you are entering this real food space by making your own bread at home, when in reality, you've just introduced a new source of carbohydrates.
Totally. So the trend of sourdough is a big one that's currently still happening. I don't know that it's going to quote unquote die, but I think the major buzz and excitement about it will peter off.
And here's why I like the historical approach, is because sourdough is not new. Yes, it's trendy, but it's not new.
Mm-mm.
And so while we say we don't think sourdough is like your number one golden ticket to being a healthy, functioning human, we also like custom developed proofing baskets for our online retail
100%.
shop. Okay, we have a free sourdough guide. It's part of our content because it's something that we do in our family. I literally have sourdough pizza dough fermenting for tonight as a snack. But this is what I'm trying to tell you.
The framework helps you understand how that sourdough plays in your diet and in your life.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what I'm trying to say, is that start there, right? Start there. Quick, like rapid fire things that I've seen or heard is like,
is this maybe spicy?
Maybe, kind of. Prepare yourself, right? Maybe this should be a Substack portion, but the
we cut the recording for the main channel. No, we would never.
The sourdough. I've heard people say things to me like, I don't know what's going on because I eat a ton of sourdough. And I'm like, okay.
Which we have been there.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I have absolutely.
But like if you go through the framework or just basic understanding of macronutrients, right? Okay. So what else are you eating? Well, I have some salads. So, okay, we're prioritizing in our life sourdough bread and sourdough things like sourdough pancakes and sourdough muffins and sourdough cinnamon rolls, and it's healthy now. It's like
it's a lot of flour.
It's a lot of bread. You're eating a lot of carbs.
Yeah.
Again, not anti-carbs, but we have to you eat them in moderation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. I've heard things like, well, but it's from Trader Joe's. I'm not kidding.
Really?
I've heard things like, I bought it and it's candy or this or that.
That's true.
But it's Trader Joe's. As if like,
I think people think Trader Joe's is more of a health food store than it actually is.
It's like, it's not like you walked into, I just, Trader Joe's. Is it because it's called Trader Joe's that people are like, well, Joe's going to hook me up? You know what I'm saying?
I think
it's like Joe's not there.
Yeah, it's an illusion. And there are some products that are like, oh, I found this in it, like, because most of the foods sold in Trader Joe's are Trader Joe's brand. They white label it. And there's probably some great things you find.
Oh yeah, not anti Trader Joe's. I'm just saying.
But it's not a mark of health. In the same way, Whole Foods is also not. You can go in and get Beyond Burger, I'm pretty sure, at Whole Foods, and I would never
100%.
say.
The other thing that, Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. Don't get it twisted, right?
They do have really good meat options.
Totally. There's all kinds of good stuff in Whole Foods.
Very local, regenerative. I'm very impressed with
There's good stuff in Kroger. You can find good stuff at Walgreens if you look hard enough. Probably.
Walmart actually has also some good organic.
So what I'm trying to say is, I've also heard people say things like, well, I eat all organic. I'm like, organic what?
That's also a trap. That's a real food trap.
And they're like, oh, well, I found these awesome organic blah, 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 and organic this and organic that. And I'm like, okay, interesting. I've heard people say things like, yeah, but I cut out dairy and gluten and I'm good to go. Or another we've seen the trend of carnivore come, and it's still here. Carnivore is trendy. It's still there.
Go away.
It's still there. And I'm not anti-carnivore. I'm just saying there's some I think valuable lessons that can be found within carnivore diet, but it's not necessarily this everyone should go carnivore. I mean, it's just I don't believe that. I think we've seen, oh my gosh, what was the one that we saw that was like the big pro-metabolic? We saw that like go nuclear. It was like everyone was going to eat pro-metabolic. It was just this is the it diet.
Yes.
Or way of life.
Yes, because they didn't want to call it a diet, which I understand. But what happened was
it was almost like so inclusive that it just got lost in that one. I feel like kind of died. I don't know. I don't see pro-metabolic anymore. It totally kind of, in my opinion, to use a trendy term these days, fell off. But
is that trendy? This is my hot take on the pro-metabolic train. I think what happened was, and this is why I'm trying to be really clear about what our goal is here, is the pro-metabolic teachings from Dr. Ray Peat and others. I think not a lot of people dug into those specifically. People do the same thing with Weston A. Price. They just look at the Weston A. Price Foundation and Sally Fallon's cookbooks, and they incorporate sourdough and butter, and that's it, right? Or you can take elements of, quote, pro-metabolic and run with it. And so these accounts and these creators, and this was really the height of social media influencing your health and wellness, I think, because that thing popped off.
Yeah, it did.
And I think what happened was it was a bit of a game of telephone of, oh my gosh, liver is so bioavailable and nutrient dense. Everyone needs to eat liver. And then people were just eating gobs and gobs of organs, or maybe they were over consuming, or maybe they were just obsessing over that. And they weren't really paying attention to other key markers. Like, for the first time, I can eat carbs again because the pro-metabolic diet tells me to, but I'm not keeping good track of my intake of those carbs. And I am whacking my blood sugar completely. Or, hey, I'm eating all this extra protein because that's what the pro-metabolic diet tells me to do, but I didn't account for all the fat that naturally comes with that protein, and now I have gained weight. So I saw a lot of women, specifically because I didn't see any dudes do pro-metabolic, but I saw a lot of women jump on this pro-metabolic diet train and unfortunately gain weight or see their symptoms worsen. And then they were left not fully understanding why.
Just confused. And here's the deal. Don't hear me bashing any of these. A lot of good people with a lot of good intentions. Maybe some that didn't. But there are valuable nuggets within things like pro-metabolic eating and carnivore eating.
Whole nutrient dense
There's
foods.
valuable nuggets in vegan eating. There's valuable nuggets in paleo, in the GAPS diet, and they all have their place in certain areas. But what we're trying to do is cut through all that and say, listen, drop all the trendy stuff. Like, we're about to drop something that's not trendy. It's just kind of unfortunate. Like, I would love to drop something that's super trendy.
We delayed its release because we couldn't figure out a better name.
It's kind of,
we were like, we kept calling it the Real Food Framework for like a year, and we're like, Real Food Framework, it's just not, sexy. It's not zazzy. It's not like, ooh, I'm on this diet. And
unfortunately, we're not on the sexy diet over here.
But then we realized, like, that's kind of the point. Like, it is the antithesis of the next crunchy movement. We don't want you to adopt the next crunchy trend. We want you to have a framework for sustainable, healthy, long dietary
We want you to
choices.
see the next trend come through and learn from it, in the sense that, like, you can take the nuggets from that trend, because that's what's going to happen. There's going to be another trend that comes around, and it could be similar to that of carnivore. And you're going to be like, what are some of the benefits that I'm seeing from carnivore? Like, what are these influencers that are just pro eating meat only actually saying? It's like, well, maybe I could increase my red meat intake, but, like, do I need to eat red meat only? And, like, every now and then, like, some pineapple? It's like, maybe not. Maybe you don't. Is there a season of life where maybe that could be valuable for you to, I don't know, cut everything out to kind of refresh and restart? Sure.
Maybe like a 30-day kitchen refresh.
Totally. But I don't know that being a carnivore for the rest of your life is the best way to set yourself up for longevity.
This is how I'm going to give you like the 30-second spiel of how I use this lens and apply it to that. Okay, I'll look at carnivore and I think, okay, it's a good reminder that meat has a lot more than just protein in it, tons of vitamins and nutrients and amazing things, but also a high protein diet is not something to be fearful of. I think for a long time, people were like, if I eat too high of protein, it's going to harm my kidneys. We know that's not true. Okay, so a carnivore diet, that's how I see it. I also understand, like, when I looked at pro-metabolic, yeah, I'm all for the nutrient density of foods and paying attention to that and eating like mineral rich, ripe fruit, and not the other thing that was solving was coming from a place where women in general were starving themselves, or we were under eating. And the pro-metabolic diet or the movement really encouraged women to make sure they were eating enough calories, closer to that 2,000 to 2,300 calorie mark for the average person, regardless of your fitness. And I think that that is appropriate. Yes, we were under eating. We came from a really strict diet culture and we weren't serving ourselves the most bionutrient foods. But I can also look at that and say, you know what? They're not a fan of fermentation, and they had this interesting viewpoint of how the metabolism works, where if you just keep feeding it the sugars, then it will keep firing. And I was like, that doesn't match up with my understanding of blood glucose levels. And I also know that that doesn't match up with my desire to eat an enzyme rich food. I want my ferment. So then I move into that. See, like I take a little bit of it and then I keep moving. If I do that with paleo, it's like, yeah, the paleo diet's amazing. We just had Dr. Wolfson on. He loves the paleo diet. But you know what? For a female in her fertile years, I'm okay with some carbs. I'm okay with grains.
You know what I'd like to do? I'm going to schedule this for you and I soon. Is I'd like us to build out a whole episode where we go through like a pros and cons list of all diets.
I feel like that's what we're doing right now.
Well, that's not as complete as I'd like it to be.
Yeah, this is kind of just off the top of our heads.
This is a little bit of a tangent. So let's end it here on this tangent. Let's build out an episode that will drop soon that is a pros and cons of all diets. Let's go through carnivore, pro-metabolic, vegan, paleo, GAPS, Whole30. Let's just go do all of them and talk about it and say, here's the things you should know. And, maybe some of these are right for you. Maybe some of them aren't. But at the end of the day, I think that would be a valuable use of our time and everyone else's. But anything else to close this up? When should people expect to see the Real Food Framework go live?
The Real Food Framework is coming out this fall. We're aiming for a September launch. That's all I'm going to say.
I dig it. Hey, gang, listen. If you've been around long enough, you now know that, or at least you know now that we have a number of options for you to get you in the real food game, to get you in this game. Be on the lookout for the Real Food Framework when it goes live in September. Be on the lookout for subsequent podcast episodes about diets. So
might get spicy.
Yes. And we're thankful for you to be here. We'd love you to drop a review, pass this episode on to somebody else that you know that it could benefit. Because again, we're trying to get as many people in the real food game as possible. We also have resources already for sale that you can find on homegrowneducation.org. We've got curriculum for your kids to ultimately change a generation, right? Let's just change a generation and have people that are growing up in this way so that there is no kind of relearning food that needs to happen. That's kind of the purpose of those. So get your kids in the real food game by getting them a curriculum at homegrowneducation.org. Got all kinds of other resources on there, coloring books, meal plans, free sourdough guides, raw dairy guides. It's all there. We also have a retail store where we sell products to you. It's called shopth.com. We sell sourdough tools to get your sourdough game elevated, but we also sell coffees, teas, lard dish soaps, things to kind of mitigate that toxic input life that we're living. This is one of the ways we can mitigate some of that is by buying clean products, and that's what we got for you. So shopth.com for those sorts of things, all kinds of stuff on there, and a lot more new products coming. So be on the lookout for that. If you're not following Hazelmeyer Goods on Instagram, do that. Get on our email list to see all new products when they drop so you can get yours when they are available. And you can find Elizabeth and I on Instagram. I'm at Joey Hazelmeyer. Elizabeth is at Liz Hazelmeyer and at Homegrown_education. We have a Substack community where we do extra content, a lot of stuff like that tangent that just kind of happened there at the end of this episode. A lot of that kind of content on our Substack. You can find that at substack.com/homegrown_education. Until next time, friend, that's a wrap.